Hello, welcome. My name is Maxine Henry. I am the project co-director for the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC. This webinar was originally delivered in Portuguese by Dr. Beatriz Carlini and moderated by Ms. Priscila Giamasi. The translation from Portuguese to English was completed by Ms. Fabricia Prado, and I will record the content in English. Enjoy! Welcome to our webinar, Smoking and Vaporizing in the Americas, Prevention Considerations about Prevention and Public Policies. My name is Priscila Giamasi. I am the Executive Administrative Assistant for the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I feel honored that this is our first live webinar in Portuguese. Before I introduce you to today's guest presenter, here are some brief instructions about today's webinar. This webinar will be recorded and archived for future playback. It will also be translated and re-recorded in Spanish and English. A copy of today's presentation will be made available after the webinar. The lines will be muted throughout the presentation so as to minimize background noise. When we get to the Q&A part, you will have the opportunity to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A box, the little box at the bottom of your screen with the letters Q and A, and I'll share your questions with our presenter. We will also ask you to complete a short survey at the end of this webinar. The satisfaction evaluation is important to the work we do and gives us the opportunity to improve our training efforts. Although we do not have continuing education credits for this event, we plan to do so for future events. Instructions for obtaining a certificate of completion will be sent via email by tomorrow. Well then, let's get started. Let's start by introducing our headquarters, the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA for short. NALBA is a nonprofit organization based in New Mexico. NALBA was created to address the need for a unified national voice for Latino populations in the field of mental health and to bring attention to the great disparities that exist in the areas of access, utilization, practice-based research, and adequately trained personnel. The executive director of the NALBA is Mr. Frer Sandoval. The mission and goal of NALBA is to influence national behavioral health policy, eliminate disparities in funding and access to services, and improve the quality of services and treatment outcomes for Latino populations. In order to reach its mission and goal, NALBA has 6 current policy priorities. Number 1, targeted capacity expansion of mental health services for Latinos. Latino behavioral health evidence-based practices. Number 3, legislation to increase the number of counselors, therapists, other behavioral health practitioners. Also funding for co-occurring disorders of alcohol and substance use, the opioid crisis in the Latino community, and last but certainly not least, suicide prevention. The TTC network is a multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the prevention fields. The PTTC network was established in 2018 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The PTTC network is comprised of 10 domestic regional centers, 2 national focus area centers, and a network coordinating office. Together, the network serves the 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Pacific Islands of Guam, American Samoa, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and the Marina Islands. Our center has a national focus for Hispanic and Latino communities and the workforce that provides services to these communities. Our PTTC is staffed by Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, our project director, Dolca Michelle Zelaya, project coordinator, and myself, serving as the executive administrative assistant. Our distinguished presenter for today is Dr. Beatriz Carlini, PhD, MPH. Bea is a research scientist at the University of Washington's Addiction, Drugs, and Alcohol Institute, or ADAI, located in the city of Seattle. Bea is an affiliate associate professor at the University of Washington School of Public Health, where she directs the Tobacco Studies program and teaches tobacco-related health disparities and social justice. In her research career, Dr. Carlini has been dedicated to understanding the public health impact of legal psychoactive substances such as alcohol, inhalants, tobacco, and more recently, cannabis. Since 2016, Dr. Carlini leads the ADAI's Cannabis Research and Education Unit. Bia was born in Sao Paulo and is proud to be Brazilian. As a first-generation immigrant and foreign-born American citizen, Dr. Carlini is especially interested in the impact of cannabis and tobacco use in perpetuating social and health disparities. Dr. Carlini has a passion for fostering social inclusion, challenging stereotypes, and fighting stigma. She applies an equity lens to her work as a researcher and educator. Dr. Beatriz, thank you again. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Please feel free to start your presentation. Hi, Priscilla. Thank you so much for the invitation from you and from the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC. It is a pleasure and an honor to participate and to present in this webinar. The way I divided the topics to share with you today would be as follows. We are going to talk about cannabis first and then electronic cigarettes, also known as vaping. These are two substances that have a very specific reason in the North American reality when we compare with the reality of the largest Latino country that speaks the Portuguese language, like Brazil. And then we will talk a little bit about young people of Latin origin in the United States and some ideas about prevention. I thought instead of diving directly into this topic, we could use the chat box a little bit to write quickly. Each of us can write our first names if you want. You are not required to participate. But tell us about any situation of cultural shock or transition between cultures that you may have experienced. Because what we are going to do today is explain cannabis through the lens of the American reality. Although many people know electronic cigarettes in a different way of the American reality. I'm going to write two, and whoever can do it, it will be great. Good afternoon, everyone. Now we'll get into another story from the chat, which is the difficulty of not sharing foods and snacks. Now, in the pandemic, Americans became more appropriate in this behavior, right? But my God in heaven, eat and not offer a bite or a piece is really hard. If someone remembers later, we'll talk more about it. I'm going to dive a little bit into this and how things are different. And we're going to start precisely with the issue of cannabis. So compared to practically any other country, cannabis in the United States is very different in terms of public policy, as you can see here. Unless you live and work in Idaho, Nebraska, or Kansas, where cannabis is completely prohibited, in the whole rest of the United States, cannabis is legalized in some way, or it is legalized only for medicinal use, but only for parts of its components, such as CBD or cannabidiol, that I will explain later. Or it is completely legal for the adults aged 21 and over. This is the case in my state. I'm in Washington State. You can see there at the top left of the screen, Washington State, you can go to the store and buy cannabis. You just need to be 21 years old. It is quite different, and I will now talk a little bit about the consequences of this legalization. It is because this total legalization, which is seen as the dark green here, happens just like a company seeking profit. It is a public policy that established the cannabis trade. Then it is legalized, which is quite different. Let's see a little bit here how we thought about cannabis before legalization, or how we traditionally think. It is a plant that can be smoked, and it is sometimes used as medicine in the form of droplets. And again, I am referring more to the Brazilian reality. Some things about cannabis that some people know and others don't, and that's why I am bringing them here, is that there are two fundamental components in this plant. One is THC, and the other one is CBD. Cannabidiol is a product that doesn't give any high. It doesn't give anything. It's above all something with many medicinal properties. The best known medicinal property of this is the fact that it is anticonvulsant. So for children who have very serious cases of epilepsy, they can benefit a lot from taking CBD drops. And so far, it's legalized in the United States as the drug called Epidiolex, and it is approved by the FDA. So that's the part of the plant now. The part that people look for altering state of consciousness to get high is the THC. That's what they're looking for in the plant. The plant can then be dried and then rolled up to be smoked, and the person who is not using it as a medicine is looking for a high THC content in order to feel the high right away. The important thing to know is that when you have a lot of CBD in the plant, it can control this change in conscientious caused by the THC. So we're not talking about the medicinal side, but when you have a drug with THC, because it's also very powerful as an anxiolytic, anti-somatic, muscle relaxant, and anti-inflammatory. If you put a lot of CBD with it, you will also reduce the effect of altering consciousness. And there you will have a medicine. But here we are really discussing who is interested in using THC to alter a state of consciousness and get high. We can talk about it in several ways. Since cannabis was legalized for non-medical purposes in the United States, in those states that I showed you, a race started to develop new products with very high THC content. And beyond the plant, something processed and concentrated, manufactured, which is not the plant anymore, started to be sold. Perhaps you have heard of these substances called wax, shatter, honeycomb, butter, CO2 oil, and hash oil. There's a number of names. In general, this yellow appearance can be hard, or like gooey honey or a powder. But basically, they're all processed cannabis as an attempt to get a higher THC level. So what's happening is that with legalization, you see the plant turning into something that is no longer the plant. It looks like egg yolk, and it's generally concentrated with butane gas. A number of things were added, and that's important for the market, not only to respond to the rush for the THC to become more potent and concentrated, but also because it is much cheaper and non-perishable. It's like you going to get this bunch of plant that's been sitting there after a week, like when you go to the farmer's market and buy vegetables that have been around for many days, rotten or spoiled and have mold on them. That's why it is important for the for-profit marijuana industry to do a lot of advertising about these new products, which is important to remember as we're thinking about how to create healthy young people and live healthy lives. We have been through a reality since legalization, when we had 20% concentration when you used to smoke a joint, and now you have a product with 80% of the active product to alter the state of consciousness, which is the THC. I always like to compare it with what is happening with food and the obesity epidemic in the world, because processed food is cheaper and non-perishable. So if you add salt, sugar, and concentrates in natural food and fruit, the product becomes much stronger. If you add an artificial smell and color too, then you don't hear anyone saying, oh my God, this weekend I spent the weekend watching Netflix and I ate 4 boxes of strawberries. That is not give that compulsion to eat. Well, we hear much more often that the person is stuffed from eating muffins full of sugar, fat, salt, and preservatives. This is much more common. They are products that give much more cravings to eat. Well, what's important, going back to cannabis, is that these products also come up with new ways to use them. So to all those yellow concentrated products that I showed you, they often add a type of solvent, such as glycol, used often, but it can be several of them, and the substance is put into a cartridge to be vaporized. So here on the left, you see some instruments used for vaping and the ones used for dabbing, which is a more elaborate and riskier process because it's a very high dose at once. And this is just a brief explanation, but it could be an almost 15-minute explanation. It's the equipment here on the right where you basically take a little bit of the highly concentrated product with tweezers and you put fire on the top with a torch. And then you put the product inside the space, you can inhale it all at once. And this is called dabbing. Dabbing is usually considered to be riskier than vaping, and that one hit delivers a very high amount of THC, and users are unable to effectively adjust their dose. And besides, when you launch and transform cannabis into an industrial manufactured product for profits, obviously advertising and marketing come along. We worked with a content analysis of advertisements in Washington State, and what we found was mostly this idea here of a forbidden herb, highly esteemed, is the notion that you can use it any time and that it's the ideal gift at all times. Instead of taking a bottle of wine, take cannabis as a gift for someone. You can see these very young girls with the idea of being sensual while using cannabis. For some reason, it seems that their blouses fell off when they're using it. Or a woman who has an idea of why not use cannabis before skiing, which to me doesn't seem like a sensible idea. Or why not put a joint or a concentrate in the Christmas stocking or choose a Father's Day gift that includes a cannabis product? So this is all very different from what we experience in other Portuguese-speaking countries, particularly in Brazil. And here we are talking about the Latino population. Let's think about it. It's very different here in the US, and we have to educate parents, health professionals, teachers in this new reality, whether they are in a migration process from Brazil or from another country, to understand these differences. The electronic cigarette is also very different. It is accessible all over the world, but in many places, it is accessible through the informal and illegal market, which is the case in Brazil. But it is extremely popular in the United States. So what happens is that the electronic cigarettes were actually created with the very noble hope of helping people to stop smoking as a new medicine, as a new tool, just like we have, for example, the nicotine patches to help quitting smoking. Stickers are good tools, and it would be even better because the nicotine that we put in our mouths imitates the gesture of smoking. I think it's an important background information to share, as I've seen this mistake, even among health professionals, is that we make it clear that smoking kills in the United States almost 500,000 people a year. And every year it would be a pandemic. Every year people die basically from cancer and cardiovascular problems, and death happens 14 and 15 years before what would be that person's life expectancy. However, nicotine does not kill anyone. Nicotine is what causes tobacco dependence. It's a very powerful drug to make you completely dependent on it, one of the most powerful ones. But it is reasonably benign. It has some effects, but nothing too complicated. So that's why these products are created. But in the United States, this is not true in all the countries. It is not true in Europe at all. The electronic cigarette was not regulated as a medicine, as a tool to stop smoking. In fact, they started a very aggressive advertising campaign targeting young people, and it became an epidemic among young people. One of the things that grows the most in the United States today is this product. To make the situation even more problematic, they decided to add flavors to it, which are flavors that really attract children, young people, and preteens, such as strawberry, peach, or mint. And they also developed all these interesting forms. Nicotine and Juul, for example, which is the most famous, gained the market and became a verb. Young people said, "Look, I'm juuling." They are using Juul. They have this tiny appearance. It looks like a USB drive to put on the computer. It's very easy to hide from parents and teachers. One alone has as much nicotine as a whole pack of cigarettes, meaning it is very difficult to use these products and not develop dependency, and they are easy to use because they taste good, and social media intensely advertises the glamour of using these products. These are the two products that I think it is important for us to understand when we come from a different reality, because they are not obvious to us. If we come from another reality, you can ask me, "But what is the problem? Isn't it just a little weed?" We've already explained that nicotine doesn't kill anyone either. You'll become addicted, and so what? Well, when it refers to young people, I think one of the things we have to always keep in mind is what is valid for the adult is not necessarily valid for the youth, even in brain development. To have the basic features of your brain, it will continue to develop until you are 25 years old. Before it, your brain isn't really formed with the basic features. So, without us going too much into that, because I'm not a neurologist, there is the front of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And this part of our brain will help develop our ability to control our impulses of immediate gratification, more complex reasoning to see the good and the bad side of things, and be able to act. And I already know that you are thinking, not everyone develops this part of the brain. But the important part is happening in adolescence. If you add substances like nicotine and THC in a young brain, these processes will be changed, especially if it is an intense and fairly constant use. So it's very important that if the person takes it and insists on using these substances, that it does not happen in adolescence. The other issue, as I had already said, is the amount of cannabis concentrates in electronic cigarettes are not very regulated. Also, in their production, there are a series of intellectual property secrets of the manufacturers that are not very clear today. And in their manufacture, it is known to have residues, waste, and contaminants, things that have added that you are exposed to. So, a classic example is flavor. In general, these artificial flavors that are put into electronic cigarettes are considered to be acceptable flavors to add in a muffin, chocolate, or a candy. But the detail is that this is for our digestive tract. When you add these products to be inhaled and make contact with the lungs, it is completely another reality, and we don't really know what it can cause. People are being guinea pigs in this process, and maybe you, for those who live in the United States, should know that in 2019, there was a crisis with several deaths. About 100 deaths caused by vaping. No one knew if it was from cigarettes or cannabis, and then it was discovered that it was vitamin E acetate that was being added into cartridges, especially cannabis, and that it was something that is commonly added to food and skin, but that when it enters the lungs can be fatal. And the other issue is about the initiation on any of these products that have the potential for addiction. When it happens in adolescence, it is basically a more or less simple formula. It's all a matter of chance, never a guarantee. But the earlier you start, the more often you use it, and the more potent the substances, the greater are the chances that the person will develop dependence. That is, it is very difficult to live without this substance, to function on a daily basis. These are three things that we should pay close attention to when we think about young people. Does the Latino youth have a greater use, and are they a population at risk within the American situation in society? Do Latino youth consume much more or not? So let me show you how the data here and there will see a lot of graphs, but I'll explain them carefully. There is a type of survey that is done every year by SAMHSA, which is the same agency that gives financial support to the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC, and they measure substance use. Here in this graph, you see ages 12 to 17 years old, 18 to 25, and 26 or older, depending on the year. And in fact, here there are only Latino people. And what we see is that young people from 12 to 17 years old, you don't see the comment above, they used cannabis 6.5% in the last month. But this use among Latinos is not greater than the general population. It is more or less the same thing. There is no difference. When we look at youth between 18 and 25, the use there goes up. It's the time when the person is going to use cannabis. And you can see here's the blue last column, while 19% of Latin people use it. And this is higher in the general population of that same age, which is 22, 23%. There are hundreds of thousands of people also. There is a tendency for Latinos to use less. And we will look at the 26 and older, it is the same thing. 6.5% of the population for Latinos and 8.6% for the general population. So yes, they are using it, but it is not a population that stands out for using it that we have to be thinking, my God, is it so much more? The same thing here. This is another source showing high school students, and we will see with electronic cigarettes that the Latin population is, in the average, they don't use as much as white youth, not as little as Black people. So we see in monthly usage, having experienced once or more than once, it is around 31% in the Hispanic population, and practically daily usage is 7.5% in the Hispanic population, almost double in the white population and less in the Black population. So again, it's not an epidemic where young Latinos stand out. This is something for us to think about. We've already talked about cannabis, vaping, and the youth. The risks to brain development and the fact that young people living in the United States do not have the highest use than the rest of the population. And now the issue of prevention. What adults who are involved in the lives of young people can do to contribute to reducing the chances that they will start using these substances early on, or that they will use these substances at any age. I'm going to present briefly about what prevention science has been talking about, what can be done, And we will try to apply this, with your help, to the cultural reality of our community. So I think I've seen for many years our idea of what we had to do was warn the youth that, for God's sake, if you start using your brain, it's going to be damaged. You can get addicted, you can poison yourself. And there was a big movement thinking that doing prevention work is this. It's warning young people in general, and it was often exaggerated and alarmed. We spoke with a lot of emotion and fear, and with time, the science of prevention changed. Even because often what we tell young people to do makes them want to do the exact opposite, especially if we use a tone of great anguish or alarm. And they are in a developmental phase where they think more about what friends say and not about what the adults in their life say. What the adults say is very important, but the way they speak can have the opposite effect. So today, the science of prevention says that we should consider the whole life of young people as a life that will increase their chances of wanting to seek substances to have fun, to alleviate unpleasant symptoms, to be part of a group or a life that will increase or decrease it. It's a whole game of chances on how much you can improve or worsen the chances that this involvement with substances happens. So I like to always present it as a scale, where if we are increasing the chances of them having a life in which the substance is not that interesting, because there are a lot of cool things happening, or if we are, as the adults in our society, increasing the risks of young becoming interested in substances, because the social circumstances of life are conducive to giving interest to young people to seek altering their state of consciousness. So, this is the risk and protective balance that we adults can use to encourage the healthy development of young people. I selected a few things here from a huge list from that book I showed you at the beginning that are risk or protective factors in the domains I mentioned right at the beginning, like context, family, school, and individual. So, what increases vulnerability or the interest of a young person or a group of young people to use substances? It's when the youth feels detached or distant from the community they belong to, both local and larger or more general. And there are no clear rules in the family, or basically there may even be, but there are not expressed in a way clearly enough for them to have standards and clarity about the way of behaving within the family. When they feel attacked by bullying, as you know, is being ridiculed, humiliated, assaulted, and rejected in the school in a systematic way. In general, by a group of young people who believe they are above them for some reason. And when this youth is impulsive, they were born like that, or they come from a family like that. So this increases their chances of seeking substances. But what decreases the odds? It does not mean that if we have no rules or affection, it will increase the chances. Everything is a possibility of risk and things that protect as well. We can protect young people when they have the opportunity to be welcomed in the community and feel that they belong. When they are recognized and when they do something for the benefit of this community, they are recognized. Being involved in activities and within the family, expression of affection, daily coexistence, the recognition again, not only that this young person belongs and is a member of the family, but also when they do good things. Sometimes we may say, God in heaven, he or she did nothing more than an obligation. But many times we need to recognize that this is a positive thing. This is important. Also, the opportunity for young people who feel out of place to have appropriate and healthy activities, an opportunity to socialize with a group, help young people to develop social skills and regulate emotions if they are too impulsive. All of this helps a lot. And then we want to look into the Latino population that immigrates to the United States. The first thing that comes to mind is, my God, life is so difficult, right? So many risk factors. We have a history of discrimination. We face problems with language and adapting to the language of a new country, culture, adjustment. We already had a quick activity in the beginning of the presentation about what we find strange. Many have documentation and financial problems. So the Latin population the Latin population comes with a lot of risk factors as immigrants. We experience many of these risk factors. Now, the question I would ask is that if we look at the statistics, Latin youth don't use that much. They're more or less within the average. I would like to see if now you are willing to say in the chat what you think the Latin community does to reduce the influence of risk factors. Even with all this exposure to the risk of the immigration stress, the substance use within the community is not so alarming, at least with the two substances we have been discussing. So what do you think it could be that the community is doing that helps? We had in the chat here that the family is an important protective factor, and yes, I think this is really important. In fact, the Latin culture has, in relation to the family, access to mental health care that sometimes can be something that the Latin population does not always have on the same scale as other American populations have. When I think about the Latin American population, we see a great difference. Obviously, the marginalization. The families differ among themselves, but a somewhat meaningful generalization if we compare with American society is to see how in our families, affection is expressed in a very natural way. So the American family looks at us and says, oh my God, how easy, how delightful, how the adults are involved, how it brings a feel of community. This is what they call collectivism. We live in a very collectivistic culture. Sometimes we say, oh my God, the Brazilian individualism. But compared to the American one, ours is nothing. It's very different. Although we have adults comparatively much more engaged in the lives of youth, there is also a tendency in the Latin population to have a hierarchy. And this is not always positive when it is very authoritarian and very top-down. But it is something interactive that we have clear rules like this you can, this you cannot. I want everyone in the family to have lunch together on Sundays. This is a clear rule. We go to church every Christmas Day. Another clear rule. Or when your grandma comes here and you greet her, you will call her señorita, madam. Or when your grandma comes here and you greet her, you will call her señora or madam. All these are very important, very clear rules that guide people to live together, and the young person can complain as they please, but in fact, they benefit a lot from it. It is very important to say that this is not to suppress the importance of the youth developing their own individuality, their critical view of the world, their autonomy. At this moment, they are developing this. And it is very important that our collectivism do not run over or suppress this developmental moment of the youth. The Latin population really has an advantage here. It is important to preserve it when they go through so many stressors related to their life situation. And what do we do with this contextual risk factors, with the fact that we are discriminated against and have language, adaptation, documentation, and financial problems? I think that one of the things we always have to do and be proud of and teach our children, and prevention science shows a lot, is the importance of us being the example and having an influencing role of being a figure of reference to our young people. It is not to be discouraged and to be able to fight for our rights in society. Where we are, the fact of not having documentation is something extremely stressful, but the advocacy via associations for immigrations to achieve these rights is extremely important. The importance of fighting against discrimination, of defending the original idea of the United States being a country of immigrants, and that anyone who is discriminated, unless they are of native origin or belong to a tribe, they are an immigrant. At some point, they were immigrants too, and that we do not be shy about those things. What helps to prevent the risk of substance use in youth is that the adults show pride and courage to belong to the culture they belong to and really cultivate biculturalism, or the ability to navigate and interact in the two societies, the one they came from and the one where they are living now. We ended this part of the conversation. I ended it a little earlier, but I would like to talk to you now. I think that we pass it to Priscila so that we can go over the questions now. First question? Of course, thank you, Bia, for the presentation. Super amazing. I learned a lot. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We received some questions and we will now start our Q&A session. Please, you can still participate. Just send your question using this Q&A box below your screen. It's an icon with the letters Q and A. You ask the question and we bring it live for Dr. Bia to answer. We're going to start here with a question from Henriette. Thank you for participating, Henriette. She asks, Dr. Bia, is electronic cigarette as harmful as the traditional cigarette? No, great question and very current. No, it is not as harmful as I commented at the beginning. It was and still is in several countries a great hope of being able to make smokers replace cigarettes with electronic cigarettes, because then they would be exposed only to nicotine and not to all lethal tobacco products. So no, by no means. But again, I was talking about young people, and what is happening is that young people who have never smoked in their lives start using e-cigarettes in large proportions. So they weren't trying to quit smoking. They started using nicotine at high doses because these e-cigarettes offer us very high doses. And as I said, a pod, which is what they call a jewel cartridge, is equivalent to a whole pack of cigarettes. And they started using these products quite often. Among adults, what has been happening, and again, I'm talking about the American reality. If you want, I could talk a little bit now how it is, for example, in the UK, completely different. The substances are harmful and risky or beneficial depending on the social context. And in the United States, instead of adults using electronic cigarettes to stop using tobacco, which will cause a high lethality later, they're alternating one thing with the other. So what happens is that if they are in a non-smoking environment, they start vaping and using electronic cigarettes. This actually only prolongs the tobacco epidemic because it doesn't really lead to replacement. You might know, I don't know if you follow the investment part of the tobacco industry, which is one of the most powerful in the world. Philip Morris brought the company Juul. I don't know if they have a majority share, but they have a huge chunk of Juul, which in theory would be to stop using tobacco. You can see the conflict of interest there. And unfortunately, things don't happen how we would like them to be. But this is a greater conversation since in the UK, electronic cigarettes are used to help stop smoking. Or even if you continue to use them throughout your life, it wouldn't be that much of a problem. Second question. Thank you, Bia. I think that following up on your answer, there is a question from Jacqueline, my dear sister. She is saying that at the beginning of your lecture, you presented the vaporizers, and she has already heard that vaping can be a harm reduction factor in the case of marijuana use, since the device, quote, delivers to the lung, end quote, a smaller amount of smoke. Is this true? Excellent question. It is not true. What the vaporizer offers that is a harm reduction, that would be an improvement. The only thing it offers is that it's not smoked. It's vaporized, so when you smoke, you will necessarily bring into your lung a series of products that are very harmful to health. With vaporization, the temperature is different, and you would not bring so many problems. So this is the advantage from a health point of view, but 99.9% of the cases, what is being vaporized is the concentrate and not the plant. So if you ask me, is it better to vape or smoke the plant? My God in heaven, vape. Of course, vape the plant. If you're going to use that decision, this is much better. It is the best way to use the plant, for example, for medicinal benefits. Now, vaping a concentrate is different. The cannabis companies, investors, and producers want you to believe in it, that it's even better. But as we explained, these products with a cartridge of cannabis concentrate with that vicious liquid have so many ingredients that are going into your lungs. And we don't have any study. And the index of THC is so absurdly high. Although, of course, the person can control it. I'm not saying that you can't control it. Several people can control it. Adjust the dose for the effect. But this is not what happens in the vast majority of cases. It can be that there are people who do this, and there are some people. So I know a lot of people who say the opposite. But I would say in my voice of an expert here, I wanted to say that it's not. Third question. Super enlightening, Bia. Thank you. We have another question here. Henriette, thank you very much for your active participation. Dr. Bia, she asks if the cannabis vaporizer can be shared by other people. Yes, as the joint is, you can, but it is not recommended. Now, I think that after this pandemic, we will be thinking about viruses, germs, and bacteria all the time. I mean, you will be passing the saliva on there, organic material from one to the other organic of your body. But it is also very common, the circle of using a joint, passing it from hand to hand. And it is practically something not very hygienic. But in the past, in 2018, we only caught the flu. Now, it's different. Fourth question. Dr. Beatriz, still following up on this last question from Henriette, we have another issue raised from my sister, Jacqueline. She says she is a nurse in Brazil, and there we have a harm reduction program for individuals who inject drugs. And one of the practices in the program is distribution of supplies free of charge to people who suffer from addiction. I would like to know if there's any similar program in the United States, and if there's any program aimed specifically at cannabis. Great and important question. You can share my email with your sister and we can talk more about it. The United States is one of the most conservative countries. It is the country with the highest use of substances and with very conservative policies regarding this issue. So there are several harm reduction initiatives for individuals who are using drugs. Crack is not as important as it is in Brazil. The big issues are the injectable use of opioids, especially heroin and fentanyl, which are now escalating with deaths and the pandemic, and methamphetamine, which perhaps plays the role of crack in Brazil. And this is escalating, and there are programs that sometimes struggle to get federal funding, which is the distribution of needles, education to avoid overdose. Programs, for example, that in my own institute, ADAI, we have the education of police officers to be able to get those having an overdose lying on the sidewalk or in the street, almost dead, to revive those people with Narcan, to educate the users themselves to use Narcan. There's also this concept called the Good Samaritan Law, that if you are with a group and one of your friends starts to turn blue and purple and there is no response, you can call the police. They will do Narcan. No one will be arrested from that. For the use of cannabis, I mean, first, it is a very different substance. It is strange to talk about cannabis harm reduction at this moment when there is a market euphoria and an enormous difficulty to even document the issue of risk compared to these great national tragedies. I think that unfortunately these programs will exist, but unfortunately they are less visible today. I particularly think it is very important in harm reduction for cannabis, which is treating people with cannabidiol, which is the part of cannabis that counterbalances by diminishing the effects of altering consciousness. And second, it is to fight against these manufactured cannabis concentrates, which is not even the case here. Fifth question. Thank you, Bia. We have a question here from Luciana that says, I am a mom of a school-age boy. Taking into account your statement that the use of cannabis in teenagers is more harmful due to the greater potential for dependence, how do you guide me to approach it in order to prevent chemical dependence to marijuana? It is a great question too. So I think it's more or less on two fronts. One is what we've been counting on, that if you're playing your role as family and you're in a community that's helping your youngster, your child, to have a fulfilling life, which has meaning, if he has good friends, he is already doing a lot, but it is important to talk with him too. It is important to explain to your child in a non-alarming way that there is an issue of this being illegal up to 21 years in the United States, which is an attempt to prevent it from being used while the brain is developing. People can use it, and I don't know if you are in the United States or not, but people will be able to make that decision whether they want to use it or not and go to a store to buy it later. But now is not the time, that there is a series of damages to health, cognitive development, and the fact of becoming dependent if you start using it too early in life. Let's assume he's already used it. It's important again to express clearly, I wouldn't want you to use something that will harm you. You used it. It's very important that it stops. There's some kind of help. It's not because they used it once that you have to take them to treatment because it can get worse. but we need to be able to give them limits and guidance. Conversations are important and young people can complain, but they benefit a lot from boundaries and clarity of opinion, even if they complain. There's no magic solution beyond that, but we can talk about it more via email. Sixth question. Thank you, Bia and Luciana. Dr. Bia developed a wonderful educational fact sheet. My colleague Dolka has shared here in the chat. We will also send the link by email. In this educational fact sheet, she managed to compile a number of resources, including resources available in Portuguese, to help you have that kind of conversation. So I think it will be very interesting to access these materials later. We have a question now, Dr. Bia, from Arthur. Thank you for participating. Could you tell us a little bit more about the difference in the demands for the prevention of tobacco and other substances between the Brazilian expatriates population among the United States and those who remain in Brazil? What is the role of acculturation? Let me know if I'm answering the question, because I don't know if I am. I must confess that I'm not super aware of what's happening in Brazil about prevention. I'm not really. I know there's a very strong movement to legalize cannabis. It's a huge subject. I'm deeply in favor of decriminalization, but I think that the legalization for profit done in the United States was a mistake. So in terms of prevention in Brazil, I can't tell you much. And in terms of the United States, to tell you the truth, for the Brazilian population, I don't think there's much going on. And I think I'll owe you anyway. I actually work basically for populations that do prevention for young people who speak either English or Spanish. I deal very little with those who speak Portuguese. In fact, I can say that I haven't read anything about this. So I'm having a hard time answering it in a very honest way. I don't know what to say in this field. If you want to be more specific in your question, maybe I can answer a little bit instead of stalling you. Seventh question. Thank you, Bia, especially for your sincerity. I really think that we have to have this position. Arthur is a partner of ours here. We talked a few times. He does an amazing job also in the field of prevention. But if I'm not mistaken, his focus is really on the Brazilian communities residing in Brazil. So his work and the work of our center, we end up focusing more on the US resident community. So we end up owing a little bit of information. But I'll connect with you too in case you want to chat offline and share more with each other without any problem. Thank you, Arthur, for participating. Dr. Bia, we are receiving a lot of positive feedback. Luciana thanking you and saying that this presentation was super enlightening. My sister is also thanking you that you are wonderful, that your class was super useful for her personal and professional life. We still have some time for questions, and I'll bring a question here, which is from my dear beloved and beautiful mother, Raquel. She says she would like, first of all, to thank you for all the information given to us, and would like to ask if it is true that most teenagers and adults try certain chemical substances for the first time just to be a part of that small group and be accepted. It's completely correct. You see that mothers are really wise. People use substances, experiment substances, or continue to use them for many different reasons. It varies, like everything human, and really many people do, because I think that's a symbol of belonging. And actually, when doing drugs or legalized substances, advertising and marketing help a lot in this regard. It's all at the same time bombarding us with images that show how happy people in groups using something. So as a culture is created around these substances, it's very common for people to use them out of curiosity, to have a feeling of belonging to the group they want to be in and want to be closer to, because it's right there. Because my God, how monotonous, how boring. I use it because I'm less insecure. I use it because although I have the same face, I think I'm beautiful when I use it. So there are many reasons why people try it and why they keep using it. What psychologists have been doing in the Washington University is interesting. There's a group that studies this drug issue in a different aspect from what I study, which are the clinical processes. They share the reasons why people use it, and they see that people who use the same substance and in the same amount, depending on the motives, and the motives mediate the consequences. So if they use it to deal with problems, they will be much more likely to develop dependence and then missing work, failing at school because of substance use. Now, if they use the same amount, but it is to celebrate situations, these consequences sometimes are not so heavy. So it's really interesting to see how the motives matter. 8th question. Thank you very much, Dr. Bia. We have a question here from Juanessa de Ana. Juanessa is a partner here in our center, in our sister center, the Addiction Center. She is a partner at NALBA. She edits our videos from our monthly video project with educational messages and short clips, super cool messages which are available in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, which are released every month. You can access it on our website. We will send you information later, but Juanessa, our partner, asks, does tobacco alone generate chemical dependency? Yes, it does. So a classic survey that needs to be updated. I don't have the quote here, but I'm happy to go through later. These are longitudinal studies in which you see what the person did at the time, and it goes on over the years. There are several methods to do it, such as questionnaires. So this study was done with the people who tried cocaine, cannabis, tobacco, and heroin for the first time, and it will follow people for a few years to know if that first use led to dependency or not later on in life. Tobacco is the pioneer, the total champion. 64% of people who have tried it once will later become addicted to tobacco, while for cannabis, for example, it is 9%. For cocaine or heroin, it is around 40 and 50% respectively. So it is very different. Yes, it's profound. That's why so many people are dying because of smoking. Everyone knows it's bad, that it stopped before, but it can't stop. Only now, with vaporized cigarettes, people are trying to stop and start vaping. But in Brazil, for example, it is not allowed. Then, when it's hard to vape, they go back to cigarettes again. So nicotine is hard. 9th question. Thank you. You saw Dr. Beatriz. I think that following up on Vanessa's question, this is the question that I am bringing up. I think there is a lot of awareness with alcohol and even with regular cigarettes, at least with beer, for example. We see the commercials. If you drink, don't drive. Drink in moderation. Even cigarette packs also brings awareness and alert for the user. Thank you. You saw Dr. Beatriz. I think that following up on Vanessa's question, this is a question that I am bringing up. I think that there is a lot of awareness with alcohol and even with the regular cigarettes. At least with beer, for example, we see the commercials. If you drink, don't drive, or drink in moderation. Even cigarette packs also bring awareness, an alert for the individual smoking. But in relation to cannabis and electronic cigarettes, it seems that there is an impression that they are harmless. Is there anything we can do to advocate so that this information is clearer and that the individuals using these substances are aware of what they are really doing? I think that for the electronic cigarettes, with the issue of young people, it really escalated. No one expected it to explode in use the way it did. Smoking had been decreasing in young people for decades, and suddenly you see it's 30 and 35% of 10th graders. God knows what it means in high school in Brazil using these e-cigarettes. So there's a lot of awareness campaign already. But the point is that the public health funds are very difficult comparing to the market funds from these companies. The same thing with cannabis. In legal places, using influencers. If anyone has ever heard of Netflix series that each episode was funded to launch a different cannabis product on the market. The name of the series is Disjointed, and Kathy Bates is an excellent artist, so this is very powerful. I think one of the first things we have to do is to demand and fight, and the United States is great in this sense. The possibility of a so developed democracy to fight from the legislation point, to ban the advertisements of these products, or to remove any reference to young people. Brazil is much more advanced in terms of cigarettes. It cannot advertise cigarettes. It can't promote events. Males have those hideous graphic features that everyone plays around. It matters a lot. There's a lot of scientific research showing how it matters, but it is very difficult to control and what we say, and then the young see these advertisements, and it diminishes the power of prevention. It makes a lot of sense, and I think that an important part of our work, as well as preventionists, parents, teachers, community members, and health professionals in general, is what we are doing today. Dr. Bia, to provide information on a simple way, you are a doctor, and you are able to communicate in a clear and dynamic way so that we can all understand, and it is also a fundamental part of this work. which is for us to generate information and awareness so that at least the information for those using these substances, in case they decide to use it, that the information is clear and that the consequences are too. That is an educational decision. And if I were to say the two main things here, I would say is this. Make people aware that vaping nicotine first may have a lot of contaminating residue and that it has not been studied. Substances that are okay to be eaten that have not been tested for inhaling. And the second is that the dose of nicotine is so high that the person has to know that they will be diving into something that they will not be able to live without. It is very possible that 64% cannot give up that product. It will not be any more an option to use or not to use this product. And what will happen, and what is already happening, is that vaping is very expensive. So tobacco goes on because they are so dependent on that routine that they cannot do without it. So this is the first point for tobacco, vaping, electronic cigarettes. Now for cannabis, we're entering an era where there is nothing about, quote, this is natural, it's a green plant, that it comes from the earth, etc., end quote. No, they are completely manufactured products that are turbocharged, and that at least if the person is going to use this product, think about using the plant. If you're going to vape, buy a vaporizer that has those chambers that you can use to put the plant in. Actually, the use of these manufactured products is a sale to unknown destinations. I think it is really very complicated. Super interesting. It's unknown, and I think you used the term guinea pigs in the presentation. It's very sad to know that we are being tested. We're using products without really knowing exactly what the definitive consequences are. And question. Dr. Beatriz, I have a question that is also mine. In fact, I already know the answer because you taught me, but I think this may also be a question for the other participants here. So we have even received questions using the marijuana terminology, but I see that you prefer to use the word cannabis. Is there a right way of using those words? There's not a right way, but I'll tell you why I say cannabis. When we think about the translation of cannabis to Portuguese, it is cannabis, like in English. If we say marijuana, we think of, quote, marijuana, end quote. And this term has been historically designated to stigmatize Mexicans. It is a term that was associated with fictitious criminality in most cases of Mexicans who were trying to immigrate and have a better life in the United States. In states that even at some point in the past historically belonged to Mexico, and then later, the same term was used to stigmatize and discriminate Black American jazz artists. So historically, the term marijuana has a very high weight of racist discriminatory quality. So I try to stop using it. For you to have an idea of the power of this wording, in the United States, anti-racist movements in my state, the governor only needs to sign a document requiring that everything that is written in an official document that says, quote, marijuana, end quote, is replaced by cannabis, because it's going to be a big change, and the university's funds call the Marijuana Research Fund, so it will also have to be replaced. I've been training myself, and I think it's more respectful with diversity and racial equity to say cannabis. 11th question. Thank you, Dr. Bia. Arthur complimented his question. If you can't answer it now, it's okay. I'll connect you both later. Feel free to pass this one as we have another question here in the box. But Arthur explained that he believes that we end up being hidden in the data of the Hispanic Latin population. He questions whether the demands of the Brazilian community in the United States are the same demands of the Hispanic community, or if these differences end up forgotten because they put us in the same basket. What a nice question. I don't know if I'll answer, but at least I have some opinions about it. The question is excellent. There are so many problems. There's nothing more uncomfortable than a questionnaire with an alternative to others, quote unquote. And Brazilians reside in this alternative others because we don't identify with the terms Latin, Hispanic, at least at the beginning. I learned to think that it's better to belong to one of these baskets than not to belong anywhere. In fact, even when I show the data, it may be that we are in the Hispanic category, but there are a lot of Brazilians who put themselves in others. or who put themselves in white people because we have European descent and we cannot think about how ethnicity is related to it. So it varies a lot. I agree, we are dissolved and spread out. Some of us are Black, some of us are Asian in terms of race. I think we are diluted, and at the same time, it is very difficult to recognize our own demands and needs. I must admit, on the other hand, that this is nothing very original. I work with this area of smoking. So, for example, if you look at the data of Asian, if we look at this population, you will have the Vietnamese, the Chinese, with completely different cigarette patterns. If you look at the Spanish-speaking Latino population, cigarette use and smoking among Cubans and those from the Dominican Republic when compared to Mexicans, then Mexicans are not at a risk group to tobacco. So if you look at Cubans and those from the Dominican Republic, it is completely different. So our situation in American society is to be in a basket that explains everyone and explains no one at the same time. And this is a challenge when we have to face and fight for our specificities. But I don't think that it's a simple fight, and it's a good and bad at the same time. But this is not specific to the Brazilian people. So maybe we can think about how to solve this, because there are a lot of people dealing with the same problem. Last question. That makes total sense. Sometimes it's difficult for us to consult these specific data about Brazilians because even the way the question is asked is flawed. We cannot include it in this case if you have Hispanic Latin, and as a Brazilian, you don't identify yourself with neither of the two. The search result itself is already compromised. Because if we don't select Hispanic or Latin, then this data collection, you will end up in the final search results. It's worth thinking about. Now, the final question is about electronic cigarettes. This is a question I have too. I see many influences here, especially on Instagram, advertising on social media in general for the use of electronic cigarettes. Many even receive money to advertise this type of product, and they don't inform the audience that it is publicity, first of all. Also, they don't inform about risks and consequences. As professionals in the field of mental health, substance use, and prevention, parents, teachers, and members of the community in general, how can we bring more awareness about this kind of advertisement and generate some kind of control in the way information is advertised? The issue of information propagation and its sources is a matter of fundamental importance for public health, for all other fields, as we are well aware of, and the political arena as well, that it is not easy. But one of the things that helps is teaching critical thinking to young people. So I think that what we can use is media literacy, which are programs that help young people. This can be in the classroom, it can be online, classes that teach young people theories of communication and help them understand who is behind the message, what kind of appeal is made, if they are using emotions or the feeling of loneliness as appealing, and teach the young person to make a critical interpretation of what they are seeing. The other thing that has been used very successfully is called the Truth Campaign. This is also one of the few youth smoking prevention campaigns with very clear results. It is to involve the youth in social justice, advocacy against industries that are trying to manipulate young people. Often, young people start using these products because they feel manipulated or controlled by their parents, and what these programs, for example, the youth campaign did, is actually show young people that they were being manipulated and controlled by these industries, who used advertising and branding resources already known by them to convince them that there's freedom about using their product. So these are some strategies that can be used. And again, I reinforce that we are already doing a lot. We are fighting for a community that can be more just, for the right of these young people to be accepted, understood, and to have limits on those issues that I said before. That is protective too. It makes a lot of sense to show them that they are not wanting to be manipulated by their parents. They are being manipulated by these companies that are profiting from risking their health. Exactly. So if they want to seek autonomy in decision making, it is not blindly adhering to these social media strategies to the appeal of the industry. This concludes our Q&A session. We would like to thank Dr. Beatriz for today's presentation and all the invaluable work she has done for our communities. I would also like to thank everyone here for their participation. The questions you brought here certainly made our conversation richer and more interesting. Here is our contact information for the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC. Please reach out to us for more information about our projects and to request training and technical assistance free of charge. If you have any questions and want to contact Dr. Beatriz, this is the email address of our presenter. Helena is in Brazil. She is a person with whom I worked with decades ago before I immigrated, and she is a person that I can share her contact depending on the conversations. She helped me improve my presentation and make it less simplistic. We have gathered some relevant resources to the theme, including a fact sheet developed by Dr. Beatriz, available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Feel free to use the resources available on this slide. We take this opportunity to invite you to our virtual National Latino Behavioral Health National Conference on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Prevention, 2021, Envisioning Behavioral Health Equity in the Next Decade. The event will take place virtually on September 16th and 17th, 2021. Visit our website, available in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, for more information. www.nlbhconference2021.com. Thank you for your participation in our webinar. We enjoy having you with us. Have a great day. Thank you. Gracias. Obrigada.